She fought her way through law school not as a legacy student promised a seat, but as a fighter who carved her seat out of the very wood of exclusion. As an attorney, she did not chase the cases that padded bank accounts or built polished resumes. She took the cases that mattered, the ones where clients came in not with hope of victory, but desperation for survival. She became a defender of the voiceless, the kind of lawyer who carried her clients' fears home with her at night, the kind who knew that each ruling could mean the difference between dignity and despair. But Crockett wasn't content with fighting case by case. She saw how the system itself was tilted, how laws written in fine print often crushed communities in bold strokes. That's when she stepped into politics. For her, public service was never about climbing ladders. It was about breaking ceilings. She entered office not to become a symbol, but to become a shield for those who never had the privilege of being heard. Along the way, she built a reputation, fiery, unflinching, relentless. Critics tried to paint her as too bold, too outspoken, too unwilling to play by the unwritten rules of deference. But supporters knew better. They knew her boldness was not recklessness, it was survival. They knew her outspokenness was not vanity, it was necessity. And they knew her refusal to bow was not defiance for its own sake. It was dignity refusing to kneel to arrogance. Crockett carried with her not just the weight of her personal journey, but the legacy of countless others who had been told their place was anywhere but here. She represented immigrants who built lives from scratch, women who had been underestimated, people of color who had been silenced, and working-class families who had been overlooked. In her voice, they found fragments of their own stories stitched together into something unignorable. And so when Barrett's attack cut through the chamber, Crockett did not flinch. She had been here before, not in front of a Supreme Court justice perhaps, but in the countless moments where someone tried to reduce her, to shrink her down to something manageable. What Barrett saw as a moment of dominance, Crockett recognized as familiar terrain. The challenge of being doubted, diminished, dismissed. What made her different was not just her resilience. It was the fact that she had learned to turn doubt into fuel. Every time someone underestimated her, she built another layer of armor. Every time she was told, "You don't belong," she built another reason to stand taller. By the time she entered that chamber, she was not just ready for a fight, she was forged for it. Supporters often said Jasmine Crockett didn't just speak, she embodied the room. When she entered a debate, people didn't just hear her, they felt her. It was the cadence of someone who knew her voice had been hard-earned. It was the passion of someone who carried the stories of others on her shoulders. And it was the clarity of someone who knew exactly what was at stake when she spoke. That's why the moment mattered. When Barrett threw her words like a gauntlet, it wasn't only Crockett who was being tested. It was every voice she carried with her. It was the test of whether dignity could withstand the crushing weight of establishment authority. And in that test, Crockett wasn't about to back down. Her journey had prepared her for this exact clash, even if Barrett didn't realize it. Because Crockett's story wasn't one of survival alone. It was one of transformation. And when the attack came, she didn't just survive it. She rewrote the ending. The chamber, once merely tense, now felt combustible. Barrett's opening salvo still lingered like smoke in the air, and the weight of Crockett's silence, her calculated restraint, only intensified the unease. Everyone knew what was coming. This was no ordinary exchange. This was a duel, a clash where authority would try to bludgeon dignity into submission, and where dignity, if it held steady, might just reveal authority's cracks. Barrett leaned in again, her tone sharper now, her words colder. She pressed her argument with a kind of precision honed by years of judicial dominance, dissecting Crockett's position, not with curiosity, but with the kind of disdain meant to expose weakness. She framed her points in absolutes, weaving legalese with undertones that implied, "You are out of your depth." Each sentence felt like another weight dropped into the balance against Crockett. Barrett cited precedent, invoked tradition, wrapped herself in the language of authority. To some in the room, it was devastatingly effective. After all, how do you argue with a Supreme Court justice? someone whose words literally shaped the nation. But to others, it felt heavy-handed, overbearing, a show of power designed less to seek truth and more to silence opposition. Crockett listened. She did not fidget. She did not interrupt. Her calmness was unnerving precisely because it stood in contrast to the escalation before her. She absorbed each jab like a boxer who knows that the fight is not won in the first flurry of punches. She let Barrett throw her weight around because she understood that sometimes arrogance defeats itself if you simply give it the space. The room grew hotter, the rhythm faster. Voices rose, chairs shifted, aides scribbled furiously at notes. Observers craned their necks, caught between awe at Barrett's dominance and anticipation of how Crockett might answer. The cameras zoomed in closer, hunting for the first crack in either face, the twitch of discomfort, the blink of surrender. But Crockett did not blink. She remained steady, her posture a quiet declaration that she had endured worse storms than this. Every word from Barrett only deepened the contrast, the image of establishment power pressing down against the stillness of someone who refused to bow. The longer Crockett held her silence, the more palpable the suspense became. Barrett, perhaps sensing that her dominance was not landing as expected, doubled down again. Her tone shifted from cold precision to an almost personal edge, the kind that stops being about ideas and starts being about identity. She questioned not just Crockett's argument, but her credibility, her perspective, her very right to be taken seriously. That was when the murmurs grew louder. Even those predisposed to respect Barrett's authority could feel it. She was pressing too hard. What was supposed to look like strength began to look like overreach. And the more she overreached, the more the room seemed to turn its gaze toward Crockett, waiting for the inevitable moment when the pressure would produce something unforgettable. Crockett finally shifted, just slightly. A glance, a measured breath, a faint half-smile, and the chamber tightened with anticipation. She still had not spoken, but the room understood what was about to happen. This was no ordinary silence. This was the silence of someone loading their words like ammunition, preparing to fire with devastating precision. For now, Barrett continued, piling on arguments, convinced she was breaking down her opponent. Yet with every passing second, the balance of the room was changing. Barrett looked louder, harsher. Crockett looked steadier, stronger. And strength, true strength, is never just about volume. It's about timing. The escalation had reached its peak. Authority had pressed with all its might. The establishment had swung its heaviest blows. And now all that remained was the moment everyone was waiting for. The counterpunch that could flip the chamber upside down. Because Crockett wasn't simply going to answer. She was going to transform the attack into a moment of triumph. And when she finally spoke, the silence shattered into something unforgettable. The silence broke with a single breath. Crockett leaned forward, her voice steady, low, and deliberate. The kind of tone that doesn't fight for attention, but commands it. Every word landed with the weight of lived experience, sharpened not by arrogance, but by truth. Where Barrett's voice had filled the chamber with authority, Crockett's voice cut through it like a blade through silk. Judge Barrett, she began, pausing just long enough for the air to thicken. Your words weren't meant to seek clarity. They were meant to diminish. But let's be clear. I did not come here to be diminished. I came here because people in this country deserve to be heard. The chamber shifted. The murmurs hushed. Cameras caught the flicker in Barrett's eyes, the faint tightening of her jaw. Crockett's voice didn't rise, but it carried. It carried because it was rooted in something deeper than argument. It was rooted in conviction. She reminded the room who she was and why she was there. She spoke of growing up in spaces where the system didn't work for everyone, where justice was not a guarantee but a gamble. She laid bare what it meant to fight through those odds, not for accolades, but for the chance to stand in rooms like this and demand that the overlooked be recognized. You see, Crockett continued, the law is not just words on a page. It is people's lives. And when the law is wielded like a weapon against those without power, it does not deliver justice. It delivers silence. I did not come here to be silent. Gasps fluttered across the room. It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Calm, deliberate, unstoppable. Barrett shifted in her chair, suddenly the one on the defensive, her aura of unshakable authority chipped away by Crockett's refusal to bow. Crockett pressed further, flipping Barrett's attack into an indictment of the very system Barrett represented. She reminded the room of the countless Americans whose stories never reached these walls, whose dignity was too often dismissed by those cloaked in power. She painted vivid pictures of families silenced by bureaucracy, workers discarded by corporations, communities erased by policies written without their voices at the table. And then she turned back to Barrett, her eyes steady. So when you question my place here, you are not questioning me alone. You are questioning every voice I represent. You are questioning every person who has been told they do not belong. And I assure you, Judge, that question has already been answered by the fact that I am here. The audience erupted, some with applause, some with audible gasps of disbelief that anyone would dare to confront Barrett so directly. Social media clips began to circulate almost instantly, hashtags forming in real time as Crockett's words reverberated far beyond the chamber walls. Barrett tried to interject, to reassert control, but Crockett pressed on, her cadence rising now, her words picking up rhythm and force. It was no longer just rebuttal, it was revelation. She was not only countering the attack, she was exposing it, stripping it of its authority, revealing its arrogance for what it was. The difference between us, Crockett declared, her voice steady, is that you believe power gives you the final word. I believe people do. And people are watching, Judge. They are listening. And they will not forget who tried to silence them and who stood up to speak for them. The room thundered. Even those who moments ago doubted her now leaned in, captivated. The shift was undeniable. Barrett's authority, once towering, now looked brittle. Crockett's composure, once underestimated, now radiated as the undeniable center of the moment.